It's clear that the Chinese government bears a huge amount of responsibility, probably the primary responsibility for this public health crisis which has now enveloped the world. It's a story of secrecy, obsession with control, which has made transparency and information flow impossible.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus?
Because it comes from China.
Racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China.
We will beat it. We will beat it together.
The Chinese government is to be congratulated.
One thing that hopefully emerges from the coronavirus crises, but also from earlier crises such as the Hong Kong protests, such as the Uyghur situation, such as the South China Sea militarization, is that with the Western world and other liberal democracies need to be realistic about China, need to be clear-headed about China, and need to stand up to the Chinese government where it's necessary. During the early days of the outbreak in December and early January, when it should have been transparent with the Chinese public and also with the international community about the outbreak, instead the Chinese authorities were silencing whistleblowers, arresting doctors such as Dr. Li Wenliang, who were trying to raise the alarm, forcing them to sign confessions, and also then downplaying the disease. The WHO's performance has been extremely disappointing, to say the least. For much of the time, the WHO seems to be parroting the Chinese government's position and giving extreme deference to Beijing.
I will praise China again and again.
So we saw that in mid-January, the WHO repeating the Chinese line, which we now know to be wrong, that there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission. We've seen the WHO ignoring any problems with the Chinese response and ignoring problems with Chinese statistics, and instead, ironically, praising China for its transparency and holding up China as the model for the world to follow. We've also seen the WHO completely exclude Taiwan.
Because I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
And in fact, even giving a strange name, Taipei and its environs, to Taiwan, which is extremely unfortunate given that Taiwan has probably given the best response, or one of the best responses to this outbreak, flattening the curve without having to resort to extreme authoritarian measures. I won't say whether it's right for the US to defund the WHO, but I certainly think that this is a conversation that is worth having.
They made a statement that our soldiers brought it into China. No, it came from China.
So not only Donald Trump, but we've also seen, for example, the Japanese Deputy Prime Minister criticize the WHO and say that it might be better called the Chinese Health Organization. Because in the end, what you really want from these organizations is an independent organization which you can trust with technical issues, rather than politicizing these issues or being used by, for example, the Chinese government in order to exert its power. And of course, US, Japan, and other governments are also contributing vast sums of money to these organizations. Certainly, it's a valid question for them to ask whether they are getting good value for that money. There was a fantasy for the last 20 years or so that if the world only opens up to China, lets it in, then China will transform into a more responsible international actor. But we've seen from the last 2 decades, and especially the last few years, that that is a fantasy. In order to shape China into an international responsible actor, the world really needs to stand up where it's necessary and to put real pressure where it's necessary, whether that be in the form of trade sanctions, financial sanctions, travel ban on officials, real action with real teeth, rather than just empty rhetoric and a hope that the Chinese government will change.